It's 33 minutes after 10. You are listening to LBC, where I'm joined now by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who will be taking your calls. I have quite a lot I'd like to ask him myself, but I'm very conscious of the fact that the point of the exercise is to allow you to speak to him. I will begin, if I may, though, by just establishing a couple of parameters. The first, Archbishop, is forgive me for such an amateurish question, but how do I address you?
I've always been called Justin by most people. Archbishop Justin, whatever you feel like. I mean, you can call me, I answer to most things, including hey you.
And how would you define your job description?
It's being the senior bishop in the Anglican Communion, which is about 80 million people worldwide, senior bishop in the Church of England, sort of a role in public life and parliament, lots of prayer, trying not to bore people. It could go on for... It's got about 7 bits to it.
I see. And what, since you assumed office last year, what has surprised you the most about the role? Perhaps things you didn't foresee?
I didn't think that there would be so much interest in it. That surprised me. I thought initially, there'd be the first couple of weeks and then it would die down, and that hasn't really happened. I didn't anticipate that I'd have such an interesting time and meet such fascinating people. I thought it was, I thought that would die down a bit, and I thought that would happen from time to time, but there's never a day that goes by that isn't just hugely stimulating, often very demanding and sometimes very traumatic, but always huge, just passionate fascination.
What haven't you enjoyed?
I don't enjoy the fact that I don't enjoy disagreements within the church, dealing with really difficult issues sometimes where you're torn about what you want to say. I can't think of a lot I don't enjoy, to be absolutely honest.
Well, we might start the list in the course of the next hour.
Yeah, there'll be a couple of questions, I suspect.
It's 36 minutes after 10. The phone lines are open. If you would like to put a question to the Archbishop of Canterbury, the number you need is 0845 6060 973. And I just want to stress, this is an entirely sincere offer. If you ring that number now, then phone lines permitting, you will get through to the studio and you will speak to the Archbishop imminently. Let's begin, by way of proving that point, with Grace in Ealing. Grace, good morning.
Hi.
Hi.
What would you like to ask the Archbishop?
Can I just start by saying I really don't want to sound in any way homophobic. Jesus died for all of us. We're all terrible sinners, and I know that the church has done some horrible things to offend the gay community, so I don't want to sound homophobic or to start a big debate about the homosexuality issue, but I think the Bible makes it clear that homosexual practice is wrong, and yet the Prime Minister has allowed gay marriage, and the Archbishop has said that the Church will go along with the government on this. And of course, the Bible teaches that to some extent we should respect what the government says and agree with them on that. But at the same time, God is our utmost authority, and I'm wondering where the Archbishop would draw the line. And decide that we need to oppose what the government have brought into law if they were to do something else that were to oppose Christianity. If, for example, the government said we're going to shut every church tomorrow, or if they said we're going to take a huge amount of public money and use it so that David Cameron can build a mansion for himself on the moon.
If I could steer you back from...
the Archbishop need to oppose the government?
Okay. Where would the Church's role be in direct opposition to the government?
Well, Grace, thank you very much indeed. I think, first of all, I suspect for some reason there may be one or two other questions on the issue of human sexuality. But in terms of where we draw the line on what we oppose, there's so many examples through history. It's where very often things are clearly deeply immoral, deeply wrong. I'm not talking about the sexuality issue here. And particularly where people are doing things that are against actually our fundamental constitution. So you go back to the 1930s and the German persecution of the Jews, including members of my family at the time who were living in Germany. That would be a classic case. People like Bonhoeffer, whose death in 1945 happened on the 7th of April 1945. Now, there was a Christian who felt that he could not support, in fact, he had to oppose profoundly and deeply the Nazi regime, and that cost him his life. And that has happened with Christians all over the world at all times in history. Where would I draw the line? You can't predict. It's a sort of hypothetical question. What would they have to do where we said we would really oppose that? On the Same-Sex Marriage Act, what I said was that Parliament has passed the Act, that they're allowed. It's proper. We accept that the Act has been properly passed and is in force, and we live with the new situation. It doesn't mean that one necessarily thinks that the Act was a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not commenting on that, but simply we have to recognise the facts on the ground.
Why won't you comment on that? Why won't you offer?
Because actually we're in the middle of. I've commented on it a great deal. And secondly, that we're just starting a process in the church of working out together how we deal with this new situation. What's the right way of being and acting so that we demonstrate the love of Christ to every human being, regardless of who they are, and treat every human being with equal dignity. That's one of the basic rules of being a Christian. The work of the church is to worship God and to demonstrate and to tell people about the love of Jesus Christ. If we get, therefore, we have to treat every human being with equal importance and equal dignity. But the problem we face, James and Grace, is that everything we say here goes around the world for reasons of history and media and all that. And so we don't make policy on the hoof, and I'm not a pope. I can't say what the church is going to do. It's something we decide collectively, the church together, and we're beginning that process. I don't want to preempt that process by saying, here's the answer and that's my answer.
Because it's not in your gift to provide it.
That's precisely right.
Is Grace right when she speaks of a biblical forbidding of the homosexual act? Because it's not really mentioned at all in the New Testament, is it? And a lot of people are convinced that the Bible has explicitly condemned it.
It is mentioned in the New Testament 3 or 4 times. It's clearly mentioned in the Old Testament. The understanding of the church has always been, historically, that never mind whether it's homosexual, the Bible says a lot more about heterosexual sex, and particularly about adultery and unfaithfulness. And that the Bible has always, it's always been understood as saying that all sex outside marriage is wrong. And the understanding of society has been that marriage was between a man and a woman. But there are groups within the church who say that our understanding of the nature of a human being has changed dramatically in the last 100 years, and that what the Bible was referring to was social circumstances in the 1st century AD and before that, which don't exist now and which are very different now. Now, those are the two sides of the argument, which will doubtless we will go on hearing about over the next
just to clarify,
few months.
Jesus never said anything about it, though.
Jesus didn't mention it, but he didn't mention a lot of things, because he was they were taken for granted and assumed at his time. He answered questions put to him. He answered very clearly on adultery, on unfaithfulness in marriage, and on divorce. And so but he didn't talk about homosexuality. No, absolutely not.
What do you feel when you hear politicians, often political figures, waxing lyrical on the subject of equal marriage from a background of often adultery and divorce, almost as if there's a degree of picking and choosing on matters sexual, and homosexuals often come in for rather more grief than perhaps adulterous heterosexuals do?
Yeah, no, that does happen, and that's completely unacceptable. We have to be one of my favourite stories in the Bible is in John chapter 8, where a woman's brought to Jesus by some men who say, this woman's been caught in adultery, are you going to confirm the law that she should be stoned to death? And Jesus says, whichever of you has not sinned, throw the first stone, and they all go away. And I just think, Pope Francis picked this up a few months ago when he said, who am I to judge? And we just have to be very careful about throwing stones. There's none of us who have a completely clean conscience.
Indeed. Let's go now to Anne, who's in Westminster. Anne, good morning.
Good morning to you.
I think we recognise that voice.
You probably do.
Yes. And what would you like to ask the Archbishop?
The Archbishop's heart is just sunk, I suspect.
Anne Widdicombe.
Oh, good morning. I don't think
Good
we've
morning,
met.
Your Grace.
Oh, good morning.
Sorry?
Good morning.
Good morning. As you'll be aware, I left the Church of England in 1993. One of the reasons I left was because of the sorts of answers that you've just given, which is to say that the Church of England never seems to know what it thinks about anything. We couldn't get a clear steer on abortion. It's quiet on a whole range of issues. And what I want is a church that says what is right, regardless of whether it's popular or not, says what is wrong, and gives us a very straightforward teaching. One can then choose to accept or reject that, but at least there is a straightforward, authoritative teaching. And, of course, the last straw for me was when the Church of England decided to ordain women, and the nature of the debate in that synod, which I followed carefully, was not, is this theologically right? It was, if we don't do this, we won't appeal to the modern world. But your pews are not full.
Thank you. How unsurprised I am by that question, I can't imagine. Well, I just said the Church is quite clear that sex outside marriage is wrong, and marriage has been understood as a man and woman. That seems to be a fairly clear statement. The House of Bishops has just issued a pretty clear statement, which has got me a lot of stick about our behaviour over issues of sexuality. So I don't think you're right on that. I think we just try and say things with a certain amount of charity and respect for the complexity of issues that people in this world face.
Well, there's nothing wrong with charity, Your Grace, but just answer straightforwardly, is homosexuality wrong?
No, I'm not going to answer that straightforwardly because it's a complex question. Is homosexuality wrong? People can't help being gay, and every human being's dignity has to be respected. And if you put the same question to the Pope, you get the same answer. Secondly, on the ordination of women, I've said very, very clearly that I believe it's the right thing for theological reasons, and I think the opponents of the ordination of women, either as priests or bishops, are wrong theologically. Now, that seems to be a pretty clear answer. You and I disagree on that, but I'm not going to pull my punches on that. I think you're wrong. You think I'm wrong. We differ. We do
indeed differ, and you've chosen one of the few areas where the Church actually has come out strongly. But I asked.
You just said we'd come out rather blandly.
And you've chosen the area that you credited with explaining your quitting the Church, Ms. Widdicombe. I think that's probably fair enough.
No, I said it was the last straw, actually, not that it was the sole reason. It was the last straw. There were plenty of other reasons. Let's just go back to the question I've asked you. I'm not picking on homosexuality because I want to pick on gays. But the Church needs to give clear guidance. The Pope actually has. He said quite unequivocally, it's wrong, but we must be charitable. Is that your position?
My position is the historic position of the Church, which is in our canons, which says that sexual relations should be within marriage, and marriage is between a man and a woman.
Why do you care so much, Anne Widdicombe?
I care to have clear guidance from the Church. Now, I'm only choosing that issue because it was the subject of the previous conversation, and it seemed to me the Archbishop was going round in circles. And
what I'm saying is that the Church is that I'm not the Pope. I can't declare infallible doctrine, and I'm very happy with that position, and that this is something that is done by the Church jointly and together. And therefore, I can't just stand here and say, I've just quoted to you clearly what the canons of the Church of England say, what the law of the Church of England says, and I think that was reasonably clear.
I'll ask you one more time, if I may. Why do you care so much? Because the fact that the previous questioner was on similar territory would, for many people, be a reason to ask something different. Why does this...
No, what I thought it was it was the way the Archbishop answered. If he'd answered clearly and said, James, if you're asking me the question, let me answer it. If the Archbishop had answered clearly and said, it's wrong, but you must be charitable, I would have passed on to something else. I would have probably gone on to abortion, for example. Or I might not have even done that. I might have said, in general, the growing part of the Church of England is the evangelical wing. They are utterly uncompromising about what they teach. And I would have asked the Archbishop, is there a lesson there for the rest of the Church of England?
Well, that's a very good question.
Which we may get onto after the travel news. We do,
right.
Even with divine intervention, I'm afraid the traffic doesn't stop moving on the streets
I think it stops the whole time.
Great Britain. Well, not permanently, we hope. And we can only find out by doing this.
I'm Joanne Webb in the LBC Travel Centre, very busy on the M25 anti-clockwise into the Dartford Tunnel. There are queues in Tyne and Wear on the A194 because it's closed eastbound. Lern Lane is closed in Moncton because of an accident. It looks like it will be closed for some time yet, until at least at midday. In Cornwall, the A390 remains closed in both directions. It's because of a fuel spillage that happened in the early hours of this morning. The closure is between the A30 and the A39. In Hampshire, the A3090 Winchester Hill is closed in both directions. In Romsey, that's because a lorry has hit the railway bridge, so that means that's closed in both directions. In Bedfordshire, the A5141, that's Prebend Street, is closed in both directions, actually in Bedford itself. So that's closed because of a fuel spillage. Very, very busy in the area. And southeastern trains, they are still disrupted between Blackheath and Charlton after a freight train derailed. Keeping you moving, your next travel update is in half an hour.
This is LBC.
Imagine if you invented a foldable cycle helmet or a line of code for a brand new web project. Every day, someone is researching, developing and inventing something new. And if this is you, you should be getting cashback from the government for doing it. Rift Research specialise in cashback for business, giving clients on average £55,000. Just one call and they'll do all the work. Find out more. And for your chance to win your very own MacBook, go to lbc.co.uk.
Honey, I'm home. Whoa, what are you doing in my wardrobe?
Yes, hello, I can explain.
Well, I should think so. I'm surprised my fully nude wife didn't notice you.
Well, I've been in the closet my whole life.
What?
You know, I'm in the closet.
Oh,
But I'm ready to come out.
good for you.
All right, I'm out. Anywho, I should shoot off. That's my car in your drive.
Nice. Toyota, is it?
Yeah, I got it as part of Toyota's great spring offers. I got loads of spec and all for less than it normally would be.
For less than it normally would be? You must think I'm an idiot.
Discover all the unbelievable spring offers at your local Toyota dealer. But hurry while stocks last. Conditions apply.
Many have debated whether banks have been doing enough to support businesses through lending. I'm joined by David Turner of WBC Automotive. Tell us about the idea you put to Barclays.
We were looking to move from our building because it was so energy inefficient. Barclays provided our mortgage to actually build a brand new building.
So as you're growing, does that bring more challenges?
Yes, we need to purchase more parts to repair our vehicles. Barclays were able to offer us a financing solution that enabled us to release cash from the invoices.
If you're in business, visit barclays.co.uk/funding.
All lending products are subject to status and application. Security may be required.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:52. You're listening to LBC, and we are joined for the first time by the Archbishop of Canterbury. First time he's ever done something such as this, which is to take your calls via 0845 6060 973 on any issue that you need. I would, with reference to the previous caller, Anne in Westminster, better known to some of you as Anne Widdicombe, suggest that you might find it helpful to have your question ready in advance rather than to be waiting for the previous caller to share their thoughts before deciding why you rang in the first place. But that's possibly a personal view. Let's go to John, who's in East Horsley. John, what would you like to ask the Archbishop?
Oh, yes. A very good morning to you. I follow the sort of teachings of Jesus all my life, and I'm well up in the 90s now. But I wonder if you could kindly define your views on God. What is God? From a young lad, I've never really understood the word. What is a definition of God, please?
There's a nice easy one for you, Archbishop.
Oh, John, thank you very much, and good morning to you. All of us, everyone throughout history has had trouble with that question, and God answers it through Jesus. When you look at Jesus, you see God. And that's at the centre of the Christian faith, that Jesus is God, he's fully human, he sort of translates being impossible to understand into human form so we can understand him. So you look at Jesus and you see God. So you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and you see who God is and the incredible, amazing love that he shows, and his self-giving and his self-emptying and all the things that mean that we worship him and love him and try and follow him. So look at Jesus and you see God would be my answer.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much.
Thank you, John. Simon is in Brixton. Simon, you're live on LBC. What would you like to ask Archbishop Justin Welby?
Oh, good morning. Well, given that Jesus said love your neighbour and that climate change is killing people, people are exploited around the world to make clothing for our high street shops, and wooden furniture in the UK is literally, trashing God's creation through deforestation. Why aren't these issues talked about in every single church in the country? It's just that I see too much of a focus on lots of new churches, especially Jesus dying for your sins, therefore you shouldn't really worry about any issues outside of your own family or church.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, I mean, I'm not sure I'd agree with that characterisation of the new churches. In fact, many of them are now amongst the most active in social engagement, in issues of poverty and environment and all the rest of it. I would say, yes, I agree that the environment should be something we talk about, and in fact we do. We've got a whole group of people working on issues in that in the church. We work very hard on how to improve our own example. I mean, I ran a cathedral for a while, and one of the big things there was what can we do not to use up quite so much energy in running the cathedral, and we tried to do a lot of work on that. Christian faith is not just about looking after myself, about saying Jesus died for my sins. It's saying that we are stewards of creation, need to care for it lovingly and value it. And so I agree with that point. But I don't think so many new churches say, oh, well, don't worry about it.
Well, I sometimes meet especially street preachers and some people that are from new churches, and they see, when I was at university, the Christian Union people, lots of them wouldn't be involved in any of the charitable societies, any of the Amnesty International groups or the Green Action Society or anything like that. Their sole purpose was to persuade people that Jesus died for their sins, and they wouldn't do the loving your neighbour bit. And I know lots of churches are politically active and are promoting good causes in the environment and anti-poverty campaigns, but many still don't. And I do hope that will change, and hopefully it will with time. But I mean, the Christian Union at my old university was just hell-bent on persuading people that Jesus died for their sins, and that was the only thing they really focused on, and didn't focus on any anti-poverty campaigning or environment campaigns.
I'll just add to that, Simon, if I may, with an email that's come in from Will on the issue of poverty perhaps and money certainly. He says, how does the Archbishop feel about the Church's record as a landowner, in particular its hard-nosed approach to tenants, these are Will's words, and by further increasing its portfolio it risks becoming just another buy-to-let landlord?
Good question, Will. I think the Church has not always had a brilliant record as a landlord. In fact, it's often had a bad one. And when you look back over the history of the Church, we've been around for 1,400 years in this country, the modern form of the Church. You can see there's lots of things that we should be ashamed of, and I know that. So I'm well aware of that, and if we're going to be a landlord, we've got to be a good landlord. I think, on the whole, the people who run the portfolio now do their best to do that. It's pension fund stuff, really, and it's looking after people's pensions, so they have to try and make sure that they're going to be able to pay the pensions and get the best return they can. But I have a lot of conversations with them about making sure that that's done in a socially responsible way. And that often brings you into considerable tensions, because you can't turn around to your pensioners and say, sorry, we can't pay you. And you don't want to turn around to your tenants and oppress them. I know when I was a parish priest in Warwickshire, that there was a point where there was during the foot and mouth stuff that at the beginning of just after 2001, I think it was, that we stopped collecting rents for a while deliberately to give people some space.
it's still not quite sell everything you own and follow me, is it?
No, it isn't. You're absolutely right. We've got a big institution. We employ 30,000 people and we have to pay their salaries. Now, we could, of course, say to them, we're not going to do that. We're going to lay you off. I'm not sure that helps a lot of people very much.
And speaking, you mentioned the 1400 years that the Anglican Church has been in existence, the Christian Church itself sort of 600 or so years older. Brian picks you up on some of these timings when he writes, does the Archbishop seriously believe that after around 3.5 billion years of evolution, including over 2 million years of the evolution of the human species, God chose to reveal the truth of his existence in the afterlife to a small tribe of semi-literate shepherds around 4,000 years ago?
Yes.
It's 10:59. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If only politicians answered questions as adroitly as that. You will, of course, be free to expand upon that if you wish, Brian, after the very latest news. The number you need if you want to join in. And when I tell you there are phone lines free into the studio, they are at something of a premium, but 0845 6060 973 remains the number that you need. You can email james@lbc.co.uk. You can text 84850. And as the religion correspondent of The Times mentioned earlier, we've been tweeting somewhat furiously this morning as well, and so have you. At LBC is the address you need for the studio. At Mr. James OB is the address that you need for me. More from Archbishop Justin Welby coming up after this.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
It's 11 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Eleanor Noakes. The Business Secretary is warning the current housing market bubble could end up worse than the property crash in 2007. Vince Cable says home ownership is becoming unaffordable for middle-income families. Earlier this week, London Mayor Boris Johnson said property values in the city could rise 50% in a decade. We've been speaking to finance expert Richard Truer from Hargreaves Lansdown.
Mr Cable's saying that essentially the average house price cost around 3 times earnings in the mid-1990s, compared with about 5.5 times average earnings now. And this just makes many homes simply unaffordable for families that are looking to move up the property ladder. And overall, he considers this an extremely bad thing, which in many respects is difficult to argue with.
A man dressed as a policeman has shot 2 foreign journalists in eastern Afghanistan. One of the women has been killed, the other is critically wounded. Afghans are due to go to the polls tomorrow to elect their second president since the overthrow of the Taliban. Scotland Yard has been asked to look at allegations of fraud made against an elected mayor in East London. Community Secretary Eric Pickles is also sending in inspectors to Tower Hamlets. Lutva Rahman is alleged to have more than doubled recommended funding for Bengali-run charities in an attempt to buy influence. He says the claims are motivated by racism. David Cameron has praised the work of engineers who worked day and night to repair the train track at Dawlish in Devon. The line connecting London and the South West reopened this morning after it was badly damaged during the winter storms. The project has cost £35 million. The Prime Minister attended the official opening.
It's so important for everyone across the rest of our country and indeed across the rest of the world to know this simple fact that the South West is open for business, open for tourism, open for trade, open once again.
A judge's decision to compensate Millie Dowler's killer after he was attacked in prison has been criticised by the government. Levi Belfield murdered the 13-year-old in South London 12 years ago. He's been given £4,500 after being assaulted in prison. New laws come into force this weekend to deal with aggressive bailiffs. Those working in England and Wales will be banned from using scare tactics, physical force and going into people's homes at night time. We've been speaking to Stuart, who was chased by bailiffs in North London while driving his van.
He ran round to the front of my vehicle, put 2 hands into the door handle and tried to wrench the door open, which I'd locked from inside. He then clenched his fist up and smashed his fist hard on the windscreen. It didn't break the windscreen, but he just did it in anger.
Prince Harry has spent the morning visiting the Olympic Park ahead of its official opening to the public tomorrow. Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park has been transformed since London 2012. The Prince had a look around the facilities and met local school children.
The amount of money that's been spent and the creativity as well, I think it's brought it to life. I think the members of the public get a chance to come through here and, you know, the kids obviously absolutely they adore it, playing in the sand, and then they realise how lucky they are that they've had a chance to come down here before everybody else.
LBC weather, a cloudy start for London and the southeast with light rain possible, mainly dry and sunny this afternoon, highs of 17 degrees. Mostly dry and dull across England, Wales and Northern Ireland with some sunny spells. Also rain expected in parts of Scotland and the southwest. LBC News Time, it's 3 minutes past 11.
Dairy Lee presents the coolest music trio around, coming to a fridge near you. You could win one of the 3 musical cows. Totally fresh hip-hop cow. Super glam pop star cow. Or rebellious rock star cow. With 100 Dairy Lee cows to be won every day, pick up a special pack of Dairy Lee today. Over 16s only. Terms and conditions apply. See pack for details.
This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien. Call 0845 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. James O'Brien on LBC.
Top of the morning to you. It's 4 minutes after 11 and a rather different morning, perhaps, from usual, given that the Archbishop of Canterbury is with us in the studio for another half an hour. Questions that he's fielded so far include the vexed issue of equal marriage, which was probably predictable, and the rather less predictable question of, could you define God for us, please, Archbishop? I doubt that we will see the one-word answer employed just before the news in response to a question about the origins of Christianity and religion itself repeated in any of the looming inquiries, but if you'd like to add yours to the list, you know what to do. 0845 6060 973 is indeed the number that you need. Call it now to ask the Archbishop anything you please. 5 minutes after 11. Let's crack straight on. Wendy is in West Drayton. Wendy, good morning. What would you like to ask the Archbishop?
Good morning, Your Grace.
Good morning.
What I'd like to ask you is, when is the first woman bishop in England going to be appointed?
Well, we've got to get through a vote in the General Synod, and then Parliament has to approve it. I think we're hoping in the early stages of next year, but then, of course, there has to be a vacancy. You can't just sort of sack someone in order to create a gap, as it were. That would seem a bit unfair. But I hope at the very beginning of next year would be good. And
I really hope so. Because,
so do I.
I left my church, which was a so-called Forward in Faith church, when they voted in resolutions A and B. I couldn't believe it. I'd been organist there for 5 years. I've worked as an organist for 30 years, and I've come across, ever since women were ordained in 1995, and I've come across some excellent women who are excellent priests. And I think it's the best thing for the Church of England to have our first woman bishop.
Well, Wendy, it's good of you to say that. I think equally I'd want to say that we really value the traditionalists within the Church of England. And one of the difficult things we're doing, of course, is we're not a political party. When we do something like this, we don't say to those who disagree, you've got to quit.
But they did, didn't they, over women priests? As Anne Whittaker reminded us.
Some did, but actually the vast majority stayed in the Church of England.
Do you think there may be another exodus when that bishop is?
There'll be a few, and there will be a few.
Where will they go?
I have no idea. I think probably to the Catholic Church. There'll be quite a few to the Ordinariate. They may go somewhere else, but we'll be sorry to see them go, because we value them, and but at the same time, assuming it goes through, and that's by no means a done deal.
What odds would you place on it? This is the synod you're referring to.
Well, we'll see. I'm not really good at predicting synods or parliaments or anything else. So I'm just going to say we try and do the right thing. Sorry, Wendy, I interrupted you.
Sorry, so we have a woman bishop in Wales.
Yeah, you do.
Don't we?
Yeah. Do you in Wales? You do in Ireland?
Yes, as well. Yeah.
And lots of others around the world. There's some in South Africa. There's tons of places that have women bishops now.
Is anyone at the front of the queue? Is there a woman who is most likely to be?
Well, if there was, I wouldn't tell you.
That's a yes then, isn't it?
I wouldn't tell you.
It's 7 minutes after 11. Let me refer you to a couple of questions that were submitted via our website, Archbishop. This is from Stephen Griffith. He says, what can the Church of England do about the massive inequalities of wealth and opportunity in England?
Oh, gosh. Well, what we can do is to do things with all other churches, which is how it works, and with people of goodwill, Stephen. It's a really good question. I think, there's the obvious things that we've all talked about and we know about, which are around food banks and night shelters and credit unions and all this.
Well, they're not simple issues. The Conservative Party contends that your 27 bishops were quite wrong to write to the Prime Minister calling for action over hunger and blaming policies for food banks. Certain Conservatives said that, but there's an all-party group at the moment that was launched last Monday, led by one of our bishops, which is making sure that what we say is based on very, very good evidence. But to go back to the questioner, to what Stephen was asking, I think the key thing is over time we need a change of heart in this country. So there is much more of a sense of generosity and graciousness, and that comes with a real sense of belonging to one another, what the church calls solidarity, and a real sense of generosity and of people not seeking simply to maximise their own wealth and their own position, but wanting to do well, and that's quite proper, but at the same time to ensure that others do well with them. A real sense of the common good. That's what the church is talking about as a consequence of what God does for us in Jesus Christ, which is to give himself for our benefit, and that should lead us to give ourselves for the benefit of those around us. The phrase in the letter sent by 27 of your bishops, 43 Christian leaders in total, was effectively that cutbacks and failures, to quote verbatim, in the benefit system were forcing thousands of people to use food banks. That is your position as well, is it, Archbishop, or
the figures we have from a big selection of food banks, about 36% of the people who come to food banks come because they're entitled to benefits. That's been agreed. And they are, and for one reason or another, their benefit has not been paid. So that's the actual hard number. Yes, the other thing is that we get a lot of is about 35% of people who come to food banks come because they may be in employment. They very often are in employment. But as one of them said to me when I was in Truro Diocese in Cornwall quite recently, I was talking to someone and they said, I don't want to come here. I'm ashamed to be here. I was ashamed to walk in, but this people, they didn't only offer me a box of food, they offered me a box of hope, because the month is a little longer than the money. And I think, whatever the cause is, those are the things we want that we're dealing with. It's people who come and they need to be treated with human dignity. They need to be loved, treated generously, and the church is doing that. The church is together. It isn't only the Church of England. It's not even often always led by the Church of England. We're doing this all over the country in the most amazing way. It's all voluntary, and none of it's centrally directed, and it's amazing. It's people just out of their own generous hearts.
But would you rather see policies enacted that took away the necessity for people to act out of their generous hearts?
I wouldn't like to see the sense of personal responsibility for generosity stopped, but I do want to live in a country where the economy works in a way that means food banks are really not necessary.
Ian Duncan Smith has cited his own Christianity as a bedrock of his political ambition and his welfare reforms in particular. Is that a brand of Christianity that you recognise?
Yes, it is, very much so. I've always been very careful when talking, not to make this a personal thing. Ian Duncan Smith is someone who's spent more time studying this than most of us, and I'm very cautious about, from my ignorance, speaking to someone who's spent so long doing this. But we have priests and bishops in every community in England, and when we raise things, we don't do it because wake up one morning and think, how am I going to fill the empty hours of the day? We do it because we're hearing from our priests living in every community, working on the ground, seeing people day to day about what is happening, and we raise these issues, I hope politely and courteously, but forcefully, to say these are things that we need to be concerned about. But I'm not attacking Ian Duncan Smith. I'm not going to do that.
the background of some other members of Cabinet is often cited as a reason for being perhaps out of touch with the poverty issues that you refer to. You went to the same school that is often cited as evidence of being out of touch. You went to Eton College. Does it make it harder to understand perhaps the plight of less privileged people to attend a school such as yours?
I'm often asked that. Trouble is, I haven't got a decent answer to it. I've spent the last over 20 years working in areas, quite often, not always, but quite often, in areas of deprivation, on a vicar's stipend for most of the time, or less. And that certainly brings you down to earth with a bump and teaches you a lot you didn't know. And I've always been enormously grateful to the parishes and the places I lived in, where I learnt so much, and some of it I needed to learn. Of course, if you're only ever in one environment, but you look around at most of the Cabinet, there's a big mix of people there,
There's a heck of a
in
lot
the
of
opposition.
Etonians. There's a heck of a lot of Etonians, though.
Yeah, and some of them have had pretty tough times as well.
True. Is there such a thing as a typical old Etonian?
Never met one yet, but I don't meet many, I have to say.
Certainly not in food banks. Anthea is in Waltham Abbey. Anthea, what would you like to say?
Good morning, Mr. Welby.
Good morning.
I know you've got work experience and a heart for the continent of Africa, and I'm sure you know something that most people don't realise, which is that most people in the world who follow Jesus aren't from Northern Europe. They're not pale of hue, but usually darker of hue. And in London, next door to me, 60% of the people who are in churches are like that. But I'm wondering what you can do to help people be more aware of the church around the world. Because it does seem a bit like most people think, when they think of Anglicans or Christians in general, they think of some upper middle class guy,
Thanks, Anthea.
Sorry, well, you can't change who you are. That's not your fault, but I know your heart. I know you're a little bit about it.
Well, Anthea, I'm so great. You're really great, and I'm so pleased you asked the question. 98% of members of the Anglican communion who are regular churchgoers are not in England. The average Anglican is an African woman in her 30s. Sub-Saharan African woman in her 30s. And we need to remember that. And I've spent my life being reminded of that. I came to faith in Christ myself, partly as a result of the witness of the church in Africa when I was living in Kenya in 1974. And so I just have a huge gratitude to the African church and to many other churches. The most rapidly growing churches in this country are often the black majority churches. They are amazing places. And they do amazing work. And I just want to echo what you said. The church, we are the most incredible multinational organisation. We are the Anglican Church in 143 countries, 37 provinces. We're all over the world, and often in the toughest and most difficult parts of the world, doing the most amazing work. And I'm often overwhelmed to think that I have the privilege of being part of that. And we don't set up the questions on this, but I'm so pleased to be able to talk about that. So thank you.
That's a remarkable statistic about the average member of the Anglican community being a sub-Saharan African woman in her 30s.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It just puts us back in our box a bit, and it's very good for us.
17 minutes after 11 is the time. 10 more minutes with the Archbishop. If you want to get your question into the mix, then don't hang about. 0845 606 0973 is the number that you need.
I'm Joanne Webb in the LBC Travel Centre, very busy on the M25 anti-clockwise into the Dartford Tunnel. It doesn't usually get busy until much later on a Friday, but already it is very slow. In Tyne and Wear, the A194 is closed eastbound at Moncton. That's because of an accident. In Perth and Kinross, there's a load of fuel all over the M90 at the junction with the A93 and the A9, so do take care. In Cornwall, the A390 is closed both ways. At Blackwater, it's been closed for a number of hours and it's full following an accident. In Hampshire, the A3090 Winchester Hill is closed in Romsey because a lorry has become stuck underneath the railway bridge. So that road is closed whilst that is recovered. On the train, South Eastern services, they're still not able to run between Blackheath and Charlton because a freight train derailed a couple of days ago at Charlton. So trains are being diverted either via Bexley Heath or via Greenwich. So make sure you allow yourself a lot of extra time for your journey. Keeping you moving, your next travel update is in half an hour.
This is LBC.
Dad, have you seen these brand new Galliard apartments at Riverdale House in London SE13?
You mean the landmark former Citibank offices on the Ravensbourne River, minutes from the Lewisham Gateway Regeneration Master Plan, being converted into superb value apartments by Galliard Homes?
Stop it with the voice, Dad. It's only 8 minutes to London Bridge by rail and less than a mile from Blackheath Common. Looks like a great opportunity for me to get on the property ladder.
Yes, and we will get Galliard's unrivaled specification at the price, with all apartments qualifying for a full NHBC warranty. We can exchange for £2,000, and with studios from only £225,000, this is a sale not to be missed.
Mum, he's doing that chairman voice again.
To invest in this exciting opportunity, call 0207 620 1500 or log on at galliardhomes.com. That's galliardhomes.com.
Dolphin spotting on Cardigan Bay. Catching sight of the graceful osprey as it glides through the bright, dovey skies. Exploring the mighty cliffs and secluded beaches nestled along the Wales coast path. This spring, pack for the great outdoors. Pack for Wales. Visit wales.com.
Pimlico Plumbers, one of London's largest independent service companies, provide a 24-hour service for plumbing, heating, drains, roofing, electrics, appliances, carpentry and building, with a specialist division for that bespoke designer bathroom you've always wanted. Pimlico Plumbers keeps your home working all day and every day with a rapid response at no extra cost. We're always here to talk to you on 0207 928 8888 or visit www.pimlicoplumbers.com.
PPI, one question. Why have you still not checked out if you're due a refund? All Fast Track Reclaim needs is the name of your bank. No paperwork, no account numbers. We can still check PPI on every credit card, loan and mortgage you've ever had. Don't miss out. Find out now if you're owed thousands. Text yes to 82727. That's yes to 82727.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 20 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined this morning by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. And we're not going to get through all the people who were waiting to ask you questions, Archbishop, but we shall crack on with a couple more imminently. Before that, I just want to draw you to the issue of energy prices, something you have spoken out on as being a huge moral issue. What did you mean by that?
Particularly in this country and in other colder climates, energy is something you don't have any choice about buying. So it's a moral issue as to how it's priced and how it's delivered, because it's an essential. It's like water. You've got to have it.
And you spent 11 years as an oil company executive, which is often cited as evidence that you haven't been confined to cloisters in your pre-Archbishop existence. Does that give you an insight into the energy industry that is perhaps denied to some politicians?
No, I don't think so. And being a vicar, you're certainly not in cloisters. You're as uncloistered as they come. I think it didn't give me particularly, because I was doing a completely different sort of thing, which is I was at the bit where you drill for oil and gas, at that end of the business, not at the end where you generate electricity and things like that. So I don't have particularly strong insights, but I'm very conscious that this is something that is of huge importance for many poorer people especially, because meeting the energy bills isn't a choice. Older people, poorer people, you've got to heat.
The reason I asked it that way round was because I was wondering if it was naive of you to suggest that energy companies had a moral obligation to set prices fairly. I wondered if you would say, well, no, I've worked in the industry, and the notion of expecting morality from that industry is not naive.
No, I don't think it. The people I worked with had a very strong sense of morality. We used to have quite strong arguments about what the right actions were. And I remember sitting around in the evening with colleagues quite often, sort of thrashing through particular issues. But Of course it's a moral issue. How much you charge for essentials is always a moral issue. It doesn't matter who it is. It's an incredibly important moral issue, and it's something we need to take responsibility for as a society.
The church, it emerged after you made those comments, owned more than £7 million worth of shares in Centrica and about £6 million in SSE. So you are benefiting from the price hikes that you implicitly suggest are immoral as an institution.
Yeah, we have shares in a lot of things. Some of them we regret, some of them we don't. One of the things where we do very actively with companies that we feel we should have shares in is that we engage very strongly with the management on the moral issues using the power of our shareholding.
Is there a moral dimension to the housing price bubble at the moment? Vince Cable this morning cites it as being worse than it was before the crash. We know that many families are nowhere near being able to afford homes, or is this just the inevitability of economics?
There is no part of life that doesn't have a moral dimension. Absolutely none at all. And economics is absolutely central to the moral dimension of life. I hadn't seen Vince Cable's answers, but yes, of course there is the housing bubble, because again, accommodation, somewhere to live, is an essential of life. It's not just something you buy and sell, it's something you actually have to have in order to have shelter and security. I was out with town pastors, as they're called there, in Ipswich last weekend, very late, and with meeting people on the streets, doing what we could to help people. And when you meet people who have been made homeless for one reason or another, it tears your heart, what they're going through. You know, you can always say, well, they did this or they did that to some degree. Sometimes they would say to me, one of them said, well, it was my fault, I'm on the street. That may be the case, but it still tears your heart. You see the consequences of people without homes.
Let's go to the phone lines again. Kez is in Charlton. Kez, good morning. What would you like to ask the Archbishop?
Good morning, James. Good morning, Archbishop.
Good morning.
You've done an enormous amount of great good since you've been in post. When the remarriage of divorcees came into legislation in churches, it was left to clergy's own conscience as to whether or not they carried out these services. Why is that not the case when it comes to same-sex blessings, and why can't clergy be left to their own conscience while we're waiting for the synodical process to happen if there's going to be a change with regard to equal marriage in church, which so many of us want?
Are you a member of the clergy, Kez?
I am, yes.
Kez, thank you very much. I think we can't just... I think, as I said at the beginning of the programme on something, on a similar question, one of the things I recognise very much from the work I do is what we say here is heard around the world. And people really worry about what we say here because for historic reasons we're linked, not just the Anglican Communion, but particularly that, but we're linked to churches all around the world. And so before we make a major change in how we understand what we should do, we have to listen to people and go through a process of consultation and talking to people and listening very carefully and praying. And then without predetermined outcomes. Now, why can't we just do it now? Because the impact of that on Christians in countries far from here, like South Sudan, like Pakistan, Nigeria and other places, would be absolutely catastrophic. And we have to love them as much as we love the people who are here. And at the same time, we have to listen incredibly carefully to the LGBT communities here and listen to what they're saying. And we have to look at the tradition of the church and the teaching of the church and the teaching of Scripture, which is definitive in the end, before we come to a conclusion. But we're not in a position just to suddenly say, OK, our position in this country has changed. We are one of the great international groups that there is in this world. We are massively majority,
yet,
not in England.
I mean, a gay Christian listening to you there may have heard the message that he or she can't marry their partner in their church because of the conniptions it would give to some African, dare we say, less enlightened people in Africa.
Well, I don't think we dare say less enlightened, actually. I think that's a sort of neo-colonial approach, and it's one I really object to. I think it's not about them having conniptions and sort of, getting aerated. That's nothing to do with it. It's about the fact that I've stood by a graveside in Africa of a group of Christians who'd been attacked because of something that had happened far, far away in America. And they were attacked by other people because of that. And a lot of them had been killed. And I was in the South Sudan a few weeks ago, and the church leaders there were saying, please don't change what you're doing, because then we couldn't accept your help, and we need your help desperately. And we have to listen carefully to that. And we also have to listen incredibly carefully to gay people here who want to get married, and also to recognise that any homophobic behaviour here causes enormous suffering, particularly to gay teenagers, something I'm particularly conscious of at the moment. And we have to listen to that very carefully and work out what we do. But all I'm saying is really not a simple issue. And there's a huge danger in trotting out simple solutions to really complicated issues which have huge effects on people's lives.
And yet, at one point, the same would have been said about women bishops. You were fairly unequivocal on that you hope to see one ordained at the beginning of next year. Can you imagine a day when two people of the same sex will be married in an Anglican church?
Well, there's already parts of the world where that does happen. So I don't have to imagine that
here.
I don't know. I'm personally, I have a real. I look at the scriptures. I look at the teaching of the church. I listen to Christians around the world, and I have real hesitations about that. And I'm incredibly uncomfortable saying that, because I really don't want to say no to people who love each other. But you have to have a sense of following what has the teaching of the church is. We can't just make sudden changes.
You've been portrayed previously as wrestling with that and perhaps moving away from that hesitance that you've described. Does this signal that you've returned perhaps to your...
No, it's something I wrestle with every day, and often in the middle of the night. I'm incredibly conscious of the position of gay people in this country, how badly they've been treated over the years, how badly the church has behaved. And at the same time, I'm incredibly conscious of what I saw in January in the South Sudan, in the DRC and other places.
Can I just clarify?
It's not a simple issue.
So a Christian on the ground in Africa could end up being on the receiving end of violence and abuse because of a decision taken at Lambeth Palace about sexual equality, about gay marriage?
Yes, precisely.
That's not something I've heard before.
I'm afraid it's only too sadly true.
So the Christian becomes typified as
they
part
say,
of what is perceived to be the problem.
Yeah, what was said is, if we leave a Christian community in this area, I'm quoting them, this is not obviously something I think, if we leave a Christian community in this area, we will all be made to become homosexual, and so we're going to kill the Christians. The mass grave had 369 bodies in it, and I was standing with the relatives. That burns itself into your soul, as does the suffering of gay people in this country.
Archbishop Justin Welby, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's 31 minutes after 11. You're listening to LBC. Eleanor Noakes is here with the headlines.
The business secretary says home ownership is becoming unaffordable for middle-income families. Vince Cable's warning the current bubble could be worse than the property crash in 2007. Speaking to James, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, says high house prices are a moral issue.
Accommodation, somewhere to live, is an essential of life.